The sound of heavy, ominous ocean waves, a faint, tense musical score begins. Narrator, a lone ship, a destroyer, slices through the black water of the Pacific. Aboard, the crew is exhausted, running on caffeine, adrenaline, and sheer will. They are thousands of miles from friendly shores, deep in enemy waters. And on the horizon, silhouetted against the moonlit sky, are not one, not two, but five shapes that send a chill down the spine of even the most seasoned sailor. Battleships. Japanese battleships. This is not a fight. It is a hunt. And the question is not who will win, but how long the hunted can survive. This is the story of when 5 Japanese battleships hunted one American destroyer, and this is what happened next. Music shifts to a more informative, yet still tense, tone. Sounds of shipboard activity. Narrator, to understand the sheer scale of the mismatch, we must first set the stage. The date is October 25, 1944. The location, the Surigao Strait, a narrow body of water leading to Leyte Gulf in the Philippines. The ship is the USS Heermann, a Fletcher-class destroyer, designated DD-532. Commanded by Commander Amos T. Hathaway, the Heermann was part of a small, scrappy American task unit, officially known as Taffy 3, commanded by the legendary Rear Admiral Clifton Sprague. Taffy 3's corps was made up of 6 small, slow escort carriers, nicknamed Jeep carriers, and a screen of just 3 destroyers and 4 even smaller destroyer escorts. Their role was to provide close air support for troops ashore and anti-submarine patrols. They were not built for a gunfight with capital ships. They were the support staff. The Japanese force bearing down on them, however, was the Central Force under Vice Admiral Takeo Kurita. It was the most powerful surface fleet the Japanese had committed to battle in years. Its vanguard was the 1st Diversion Attack Force, containing the colossal Yamato and Musashi, the largest battleships ever constructed, armed with 18.1-inch guns capable of hurling a 3,200-pound shell over 25 miles. Alongside them were the battleships Nagato, Kongo, and Haruna, each a veteran of the Pacific War, and a formidable screen of heavy cruisers and destroyers. Kurita's mission was simple and devastating: break through the strait, annihilate the American landing forces at Leyte, and turn the tide of the war. For the men of Taffy 3, the morning of October 25 began like any other. Little did they know, they were about to become the only thing standing between the Japanese Navy and catastrophe. The scale of the threat, sound of radar pings increasing in frequency, distant alarm bells, tense, rhythmic music. Narrator, at 0647 hours, lookouts on the American ship spotted anti-aircraft fire to the northwest. Confusion reigned. Were their own ships firing at enemy aircraft? That confusion turned to pure, cold dread minutes later, when the tall, pagoda-like masts of Japanese warships broke the horizon. Pause, reports began flooding the bridges of the American ships. Multiple battleships, bearing 330, distance 20 miles. Heavy cruisers, closing fast. For Admiral Sprague and his commanders, the sight was incomprehensible. The world's most powerful surface fleet had somehow slipped through the American defensive nets and was now, literally, on their doorstep. On the bridge of the Heermann, Commander Hathaway saw the same terrifying panorama. His ship, the Heermann, displaced just 2,050 tons. A single broadside from the Yamato weighed more than his entire vessel. His largest guns were 5.5-inch/38 caliber mounts. They were effective against aircraft and small ships, but against the 16-inch armor belts of the Japanese battleships, they were little more than firecrackers. His only real weapons against such behemoths were his 10-21-inch torpedoes and his ship's 35-knot speed. By 0700 hours, the Japanese had found the range. The first salvos from the Yamato's 18.1-inch guns passed over the American carriers, the shells themselves sounding like freight trains as they tore through the air. The ocean around the tiny American task unit began to erupt in geysers of white and green water, the Japanese using dye-marked shells to correct their fire. The sea was a chaos of shell splashes, the air thick with the smell of cordite and the sea. Admiral Sprague made his decision instantly. He turned his carriers into the wind to launch their aircraft, and ordered a retreat towards a squall line to the east. It was a desperate race for cover. Pause, and to buy time for that retreat, he gave the order that would define the battle. To his destroyer screen, he transmitted, "Small boys, attack." The charge begins, sound of ship engines roaring to full power, the deep thrum of large-caliber shells passing overhead, the crump of near misses. Narrator, the small boys were the destroyers. The Heermann, the Hull, and the Johnston. What followed was one of the most audacious and suicidal naval charges in history. The Johnston led the way, spewing smoke and charging directly at the Japanese line. The Heermann followed suit. Commander Hathaway ordered flank speed, and the destroyer's engines screamed in protest, pushing her past 35 knots. She charged through the shell splashes, her deck awash, her crew drenched in salt spray and fear. The charge begins, sound of ship engines roaring to full power, the deep thrum of large-caliber shells passing overhead, the crump of near misses. Narrator, the small boys were the destroyers. The Heermann, the Hull, and the Johnston. What followed was one of the most audacious and suicidal naval charges in history. The Johnston led the way, spewing smoke and charging directly at the Japanese line. The Heermann followed suit. Commander Hathaway ordered flank speed, and the destroyer's engines screamed in protest, pushing her past 35 knots. She charged through the shell splashes, her deck awash, her crew drenched in salt spray and fear. The world narrowed to a few terrifying realities. The deafening roar of the Heermann's own 5-inch guns as they returned fire, targeting the superstructures of the enemy cruisers and battleships in a futile hope of causing some damage. The shuddering impact of near misses that hammered the hull and knocked men off their feet. The constant, high-pitched whine of shrapnel slicing through the air. Pause, and always, the colossal silhouettes of the enemy, growing larger with every passing second. Japanese company massing in valley. By 1400 hours, the first probing attacks began. Small groups of Japanese soldiers, skilled in infiltration tactics, began testing the American perimeter. They moved like ghosts through the undergrowth. Coughlin's men, nerves frayed, held their fire until the last possible moment. The sharp report of the M1 Garand's was answered by the higher-pitched crack of the Arisaka rifles. The firefight was short, brutal, and costly. 2 of Coughlin's men were hit, 1 fatally. The Japanese melted back into the jungle. The Heermann was now caught between 2 titans. Hathaway had to make a split-second decision. He ordered a hard turn to starboard, narrowly avoiding a collision with the cruiser, and lined up for another torpedo run. He was now dueling with a battleship and a cruiser simultaneously. The Heermann fired her remaining torpedoes at the Haguro. In the chaos, one of the battleships, likely the Haruna, was forced to turn away sharply to avoid the Heermann's first torpedo spread, a temporary victory, but a victory nonetheless. But the storm of steel was relentless. A 14-inch shell from a battleship slammed into the Heermann's wheelhouse. Miraculously, it was a dud. It tore through the chart room, wrecking everything in its path, but failed to explode. Had it detonated, the entire bridge would have been vaporized. The ship was being bracketed, the shell splashes creeping closer. It seemed only a matter of time before a direct hit sent the little destroyer to the bottom. Music becomes more determined, heroic. Sounds of aggressive engine noise and continuous 5-inch gunfire. Narrator, but the Heermann was not fighting alone. The other destroyers, the Hull and the Johnston, were waging their own desperate fights, drawing fire, and launching their own torpedoes. In the air, a miracle was unfolding. The pilots from Taffy 3's escort carriers, flying obsolete Avenger torpedo bombers and Wildcat fighters, began a relentless series of attacks. With no torpedoes or armor-piercing bombs left, they made dry runs, strafing the Japanese bridges with their .50 caliber machine guns, and pretending to dive bomb, forcing the Japanese ships into evasive maneuvers. It was a bluff of epic proportions, but it worked. The Japanese formation, faced with this unrelenting, chaotic, and multidirectional assault, began to lose its cohesion. Commander Hathaway, seeing the Japanese momentarily confused, pressed his attack. The Heermann was now a ghost ship in the smoke, appearing, firing, and disappearing again. Her 5-inch guns fired until the barrels were hot, targeting the bridge of the lead cruiser, the Chikuma, which was menacing the carriers. The Heermann's gunners achieved the impossible. They managed to suppress the Chikuma's fire control, causing enough damage and confusion to throw the cruiser's aim off. Then, at 0820 hours, the Heermann's second torpedo spread found its mark. A tremendous explosion rocked the heavy cruiser Chikuma. While historians debate the exact source of the fatal blow, the Heermann's aggressive attack played a critical role in crippling the warship. The tide of the battle, imperceptibly at first, began to turn. The relentless, almost feral aggression of the American destroyers and the constant harassment from the air convinced Admiral Kurita that he was not facing a mere escort group, but the vanguard of Admiral Halsey's powerful Third Fleet. Fearing a massive counterattack and his own forces' disintegration, Kurita made a fateful decision. At 0911 hours, he gave the order no American sailor could believe. All ships, cease action. Reverse course. The 5 battleships, the heavy cruisers, the entire central force, began to turn around. They were breaking off the attack. Music becomes solemn, respectful. Sound of gentle waves, narrator. As the Japanese ships retreated over the horizon, an eerie silence fell over the Surigao Strait, broken only by the crackle of fires and the cries of the wounded. The cost of Taffy 3's stand had been horrific. The destroyers Hull and Johnston were sunk, along with the destroyer escort Samuel B. Roberts. One of the escort carriers, the Gambier Bay, was also lost. Over 1,000 American sailors perished in the desperate fight. The USS Heermann had survived, but she was a battered wreck. She had suffered multiple near misses, a direct hit from a dud 14-inch shell, and significant damage from smaller caliber fire. 5 of her crew were dead, and many more wounded. But her actions, and the actions of the entire task unit, had achieved the impossible. They had stopped the most powerful Japanese naval force of the operation, saving the vulnerable landing ships and troops at Leyte Gulf from certain destruction. The Battle off Samar, as it became known, stands as one of the U.S. Navy's finest hours, a testament to the courage of sailors who refused to back down, even when facing certain annihilation. For his conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity, Commander Amos Hathaway was awarded the Navy Cross. The USS Heermann received a Presidential Unit Citation, her crew hailed as heroes. Slow-motion shot of Barrel's hip-fire charge, as the German infantry closed in for what they believed would be the final, easy kill. Barrel made a series of rapid, calculated decisions. The machine gun was almost out of ammo, but he still had his personal weapon and a few grenades. The turning point would not be a miracle of reinforcement, but a masterpiece of individual audacity and sheer, unadulterated guts. He waited until the lead elements of the German assault were mere meters from his position. Then, in a move that defied all conventional infantry tactics, he stood up. Instead of firing his M1 Garand from the prone, he raised it to his hip and began walking toward the enemy, firing the semi-automatic rifle from the hip as he advanced. The 8-round ping of the N-block clip ejecting was followed instantly by the sound of a fresh clip being slammed home. He was a one-man bayonet charge without the bayonet. The psychological impact was instantaneous and profound. The German soldiers, expecting a final, desperate burst of machine gun fire or a surrendering, broken man, were met instead with a specter, a mud-caked, wild-eyed American advancing on them with cold, methodical fire. For a few critical seconds, their advance faltered. Confusion reigned. Was this a trap? Was this the spearhead of an American counterattack?